Welcome to USC Primetime Live here at the Voice of College Football. I'm Matt Zemek. He's Ethan Inman coming at you with another show. And hey, we're 1 week away, so there is no shortage of topics to talk about. Ethan, we have a lot of news items to roll through. And we're going to hit the big ticket items, but we're also just going to deal with just, nuts and bolts news. So one of the items on the agenda, Lincoln Riley says that the USC captains will be decided on a game-by-game basis for the upcoming season. So, Ethan, your take on that. What do you think it means, and how much do you think it means?
Yeah, I think it's something that, fans have differing opinions on. I can really see both sides of the argument. It's something that they've, kind of done throughout Lincoln Riley's tenure at USC, so it's nothing new. But I think, like, on one side of the equation, I can see the argument that you kind of want to make your captains earn that designation every week. Like, that makes sense to me. It gives, players the incentive to kind of work really hard, separate themselves, be leaders in the room, not get complacent. Because I played high school sports. I was on some teams where, I had great captains, and I was on teams where some of the captains got kind of complacent, and, the coaching staff had installed them as the full season captain. So there was no real consequences for that. So I think that that's one side of it that I can see. I can also see the other side, though, where, that some fans are frustrated with, where it's like you want more consistent leadership. You want, like, when things get tough, like players that you can kind of depend on to right the ship and lead the squad and that kind of thing. I think the point at which USC stands at this time, because I briefly before the show was just trying to think, okay, if I'm in Lincoln Riley's shoes and I'm gonna install 4, or so, just captains that are going to be captains every week, who would I pick? And Kamari Ramsey immediately came to mind. But beyond that, I just don't know if there's any players that are so clearly, some of the best players on the team and poised to be leaders. Like, I think even, you think about media days, they sent Malachi Lemon and they sent Elijah Page to media days. Jacobe Lane's also projected to be very good. You often default to the quarterback, and that's Mayaba this year. I just don't feel like there's enough guys who are, USC is just kind of in this middle ground where they have a lot of players who've shown a lot of promise, but they don't have guys who are like Kamari Ramsey, where they're like fifth-year seniors and, they've been stars all of their college career, and they were stars last year, and they're going to be stars this year. Eric Gentry's kind of another one, but if he can stay healthy, but then if he's not healthy, you don't have him on the field, as you have one of your captains that isn't on the field. So I just, I can see both sides of it. I think the only thing that I would say, like, I don't think that it's necessarily a good or a bad thing. The only thing that I would say is if, it shouldn't become like a participation trophy thing where, like, Lincoln Riley's just kind of cycling through different people just to kind of like let everybody get their shot at it. Like, if someone like Kamari Ramsey is separating themselves as, a leader every single week, then give Kamari Ramsey the captainship every single week. Like, there's no reason to now, if he has a bad week of practice and, is kind of slacking off or whatever, and you feel the need to, hold him accountable by not giving him the captaincy or whatever, or somebody else really separates himself, then, like, good, go for it. But I would just say, yeah, like, if someone's a leader, give them, no participation trophies here. Like, if someone's the leader, give them the captaincy, even if you're giving the same guy the captaincy every single week. And so we'll see how that unfolds. But yeah, like I said, where USC's roster is at, it kind of makes sense. And I don't think it's necessarily one way or the other, but I'm sure you have some thoughts on it, Matt.
Well, I would just ask you a follow-up, which kind of gets to my thought process on this. I don't really disagree with you about really anything you've said, but just in asking this question, I think you, Ethan, and everyone in the audience watching here at the Voice of College Football, you'll kind of get where I'm going with this. Ethan, if USC was coming off an 11-1 season, would this be happening?
Probably not, because if they were coming off an 11-1 season, then there would, to have played that well, then there would have been players that were playing, like consistent superstars on a week-to-week basis. And, therefore there'd be clear guys that are going to lead the roster. So unless all those guys went to the NFL, which is highly unlikely, I think you'd have more clear guys to kind of lead the team in that facet.
Yeah, I think that really sums it up, right? That if USC had been like a Pete Carroll level program past couple seasons, you don't need to deal with that. You have your big dogs, you have your leaders in the room, you have your culture, you have everything exactly where you want it to be. You have your juggernaut and you have your top guys. So the fact that USC's been struggling, there's this inconsistency that I think shows why this is being done. And I think it does make sense. Like, this is not just going to be given to you. You have to go out and get it. So what happens to what relates to the captaincy relates to the season and relates to success. It's not going to be given to you. You have to go out and get it. So again, fundamentally agree with you. Fundamentally agree with Lincoln Riley on this matter. All right, moving along. So Jacobe Lane was carrying an injury in the off season, and everyone's saying he's going to be okay, but it just gives you a little bit of pause, right? And like, from covering USC basketball past couple years, like, oh, by the way, this player's injured right before game time. Like, these late reveals of injuries. It's wait, where did this come from, and how come it was such a secret, and how come it was kept quiet? You know, we've seen this before at USC, and it's not so much a Lincoln Riley thing, but just injury disclosures, and of course, with sports betting now being as pervasive as it is, bettors want these injury reports disclosed, and you've seen to some degree, sports organizations be more upfront about disclosing injuries, on your injury reports before games, so that everyone has a little bit more clarity. All the dollars that are part of the industry, the dollars that are part of betting, be a little bit more transparent. How unsettled should USC be? Should USC fans be that this was just kept as quiet as it is? I think the fact that USC starts the season with easy games might mitigate, but nevertheless could just be that little thing that just gets people a little bit more unsettled than they otherwise would have been. Where do you come down on that one, Ethan?
Well, I think Trojan Fight makes a great point in the chat, which is what would have even been able to happen in May when, this injury supposedly happened, because aren't they away from the team during that time of the year? Because, the way that USC has always treated injuries across sports, we're never going to find out the story. Like, this is not, we're not going to get 20 minutes of the USC football documentary detailing, Michael Jordan's flu game story on what happened to Jacobe Lane's foot. It's never going to happen. The fact that we even know what body part was injured is like a step up from what it is a lot of the time. It's just like, oh, they're dealing with an undisclosed injury. And it's like, well, how are fans supposed to know when to expect him back? Yada, yada, yada. It can just create some more fan frustration. I think I saw a lot of fans on Twitter reacting to some of the USC insiders who tweeted out, like, Jacobe Lane broke his foot, but he'll be fine for week 1. And they were just like, man, the first half of that tweet, like, my heart dropped. And I was like, yeah, like, I had kind of a similar reaction to the first tweet I read, because it was just like, Jacobe Lane broke his foot. And I was like, what? And then it was like in May. And I was like, oh, like, okay. I don't really see any, negative repercussions of letting the public know that was something that happened. But it's just the era that we're in, I guess. Like, athlete injuries are really kept close to the chest, as are a lot of things. But yeah, I think you make a good point about USC's on-ramp to the season. I mean, if we were, dealing with Jacobe Lane recovering from a broken foot heading into the LSU game, then maybe we're a little bit more concerned. But, we're playing Missouri State. So if Jacobe Lane doesn't play or is limited, it's not going to, be the difference between winning and losing against Missouri State, one would think. And the same thing with Georgia Southern, and quite honestly, the same with Purdue. So, and, Michigan State is only a step above that. So really, like, it's not a huge concern, like, in this specific instance, I don't think, but I do think it does point at the larger trend of, like, man, like, is the era of us, like, knowing what's going on with these players over? Like, are we ever, like, I don't know if Trojan Fight's question ever gets answered. I don't know if we ever find out what happens to Jacobe Lane's foot. Like, oh, you mentioned USC basketball. Like, the Elijah Arenas has just had the craziest couple of months. Will we ever know everything that went behind all of that? Probably not that either. And I mean, part of it makes a lot of sense. I mean, these are still kids in college, and you want to not expose them to the media machine necessarily. You want to protect them somewhat. They're still kids or fresh young adults, but it's still just kind of like would it have hurt people to disclose back in May that he was dealing with a broken foot, but would have been ready for the start of the season? Then like you can avoid any fears and any worries that the fans have. So yeah, I mean, like I said, in this specific instance, it's not a huge deal, but in other instances, it can become a bigger deal. Like you said, people do a lot of betting now. People, I think that fans just care, and fans want to know what's going on with players and how they can support them. And I'm sure if Jacobe Lane came out and said that he'd broken his foot in May, he would have got a lot of get well soon wishes and stuff like that. So it's just kind of like not fans just maybe feel a little deceived or bummed that they didn't find out or got the jump scare of seeing the tweet. But yeah, so we'll see if this kind of policy of holding back injuries comes into more significant play later. But yeah, for this instance, it's not a gigantic deal because of the easy on-ramp schedule, like you said.
Well, staying with injuries and also kind of tying the Jacobe Lane situation, ready to go, but maybe you soft pedal him just a little bit in these early weeks. You gently ease him into the season, given the soft schedule. Let's hit on a couple things to tie items together. Quentin Joyner, no longer a Trojan, now at Texas Tech. He gets injured, so like USC, just the fickle finger of fate dodges a bullet, because imagine Joyner still being with USC and being out for the season. So USC avoids that. And on the other side, you have Eli Sanders, who drew rave reviews from the coaching staff this past week. So the tie-in with Jacobe Lane is simply, this might mean USC is going to pound the rock a little bit more first few weeks, but it also raises the possibility, maybe Lincoln Riley's going to lean on one guy instead of having that running back by committee with an equal amount of snaps for everybody. So Ethan, a lot of layers of the onion to peel away here. Let's take first just the Jacobe Lane connection with USC perhaps running the ball a little bit more these first 3 weeks to reduce Jacobe Lane's workload and maybe soft pedal the passing game a little bit more in light of this revelation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any world, even pre the injury news, where you see Jacobe Lane making 10 catches in weeks 1 through 3. So I think, and yeah, this is just kind of even more of a sign of like, I'm sure they get him the ball a couple of times to get him in rhythm, but especially if they're up by even 3 touchdowns, there's no point in overextending him if he's really recovering. He's still rehabbing. You want him to be at the top of his game and not worn down come Illinois. But yeah, I mean, so yeah, I could definitely see them running the ball more because once Jacobe Lane is like even slightly less of an option, then you're really just leaning on 2 really established guys in the passing game, and one of them's a tight end and Lake McCree, and then the other one's Mekhi Lemon, obviously. And you don't want to run either of those guys into the ground either. And like you said, this is a deep running back room. We've heard that over and over from this coaching staff. So if you can kind of cycle in all of those running backs, get them all, see how they all do as featured backs in this backfield, and just see how they can kind of carry the offense against these weaker lines and all that kind of stuff, then yeah, I mean, it seems like all signs are pointing towards running the ball a lot. But you never know with Lincoln Riley. I guess we'll have to see for sure.
Yeah, so let's now transition into that other topic, which you really just mentioned, in terms of making sure this is a committee situation at running back instead of leaning on one guy. And, Woody Marks was a baller. Marshawn Lloyd was a baller. Travis Dye was a baller. I mean, it's not as though they didn't earn their snaps, but you don't want them subjected to punishment. And now that you're in the Big Ten, like it's really important that your plan B is very comparable to plan A, not necessarily exactly as good, but almost as good. And just the idea that you're coming at defenses with a fresh running back consistently throughout the game. Like there's value just in that. It's not a negative commentary on your RB1. So, it's obviously good news that Eli Sanders or any player is getting rave reviews from the staff. You want that in camp. Of course you do. But like, we don't want this to be a situation, right, where one guy is getting twice as many touches as other guys and other guys having talent, like the aforementioned Quentin Joyner, who had to be behind Woody Marks, didn't get as many touches as he could have, or many will think should have received. So you want to see the praise for Eli Sanders, but you don't want to see Lincoln Riley fall in love with one running back. Let's wrestle with the implications of this, Ethan.
Yeah, so just so the viewers know which quote we're talking about, he said Eli Sanders has had one of the best training camps of anyone and called him the most explosive back in the room. I think the interesting thing about Eli Sanders and, kind of playing a little bit of like Lincoln Riley devil's advocate here of like why he could fall in love with Eli Sanders is just, Lincoln Riley is known for the air raid offense. He's known for airing the ball out a little bit more, trying to kind of not just do as, traditional of handoff plays, but even, when he's getting his running backs involved, it's, more dynamic offenses. It's so, could he fall in love with someone like Eli Sanders, who, is called dynamic? Seems like he could be effective in the passing game as well. Could that happen? Yeah. I mean, Eli Sanders also has a lot more experience than the other two backs that are kind of in the room and expected to contribute. I mean, Brian Jackson just really only has that one game against Texas A&M under his belt. And then Wayman Jordan's very experienced at the JUCO level, but JUCO to USC is a lot bigger transition than the Mountain West to USC or a Mountain West equivalent, group of 5 school. So I think that is a reason why you could see that happen. But I do think that we've heard a lot from Lincoln Riley that he really does like all 3 backs. I mean, we talked last week about how we've seen in practice like a lot of that, a lot of the option plays with, Brian Jackson and Wayman Jordan in the same backfield, that type of thing. And and I think specifically pointing out that he said that Eli Sanders was one of the most explosive back in the room. And, that is, not him saying that Eli Sanders is the best. He just called him the most explosive. So when you think most explosive, you think someone who has big play potential, but is not necessarily like an every down back, which is what, Wayman Jordan profiles more as. So you would think that you're going to see almost a, like Kyle Shanahan 49ers, but pre-CMC, where they, had one back that was kind of the every down back, and they had one back that was kind of the burner, or similar to what kind of the Detroit Lions do now with their 2 running backs. You would think and hope that that's what's kind of his thought process in terms of calling Eli Sanders the most explosive running back, because the most explosive and the best don't necessarily always mean the same thing. But yeah, and then, briefly on Quentin Joyner, it's a real bummer. I think every USC fan is bummed for him because, him never reaching his full potential at USC is not really his own fault. He showed a lot of flashes in games and just wasn't ever really utilized. And Lincoln Riley really leaned heavily on the number 1 back every year and kind of never utilized some of the backups who, showed a little bit of stuff in some of the games. Like, you think about Raleek Brown. Raleek Brown hasn't exactly gone on to be a star, but he was a guy who, was a 5-star coming in, showed some potential. And then now you have Quentin Joyner. And a lot of people at Texas Tech thought that he was kind of the answer for, replacing their very good running back that just left them. So, yeah, I mean, it's a bummer for him. I think every USC fan is bummed for him for sure. Like you said, dodged the bullet a little bit. It's better for USC fans that he wasn't projected to be the number one guy this year, and then got injured, and USC doesn't have these transfers in to replace him. But yeah, I mean, if something like that were to happen, one of the running backs gets hurt this year in a similar Quentin Joyner type injury, it does feel like USC is more equipped to handle it than ever. And yeah, I do think based on Lincoln Riley's rhetoric that he is thinking about how to incorporate all the backs and is thinking that he will incorporate all the backs. But there's always a possibility, and that we could see him fall into old patterns. And I detailed all the reasons why that could happen with Eli Sanders. But like I said, we'll just have to see. We'll have to see when games get going. It'll be really interesting to see in these first couple of weeks, because it seems like a perfect opportunity to not show your hand, play all three running backs. And if he's already leaning on one of those three running backs this early, then that might be a clear sign that he's falling in love with somebody a little too much again. So we'll see.
One more item in this early part of the show. Lincoln Riley and the coaching staff had a lot of good things to say about several freshmen. Talk to us, Ethan, about these freshmen, their roles, how significant level of involvement you think they're going to have on this team, and how big a factor they could be in this team's potential success this year.
Yeah, so I think the most significant running back, or sorry, not running backs, most significant freshman comments that I've seen have been about defensive back Alex Graham. And, Danton Lynn came out and said, we have enough confidence that he knows what to do and has the ability to go out there with the ones, which obviously means the first team. I believe there have been a couple of injuries in the secondary that have kind of pressed Alex Graham into service. Like, I think it's Chasen Johnson who's been dealing with something a little bit wrong, not something crazy serious, but just something that's kind of limited him in practice. So, it's good to hear that, such high praise from Danton Lynn. You don't always hear, freshmen getting so highly touted. And, this is not, I'll talk about another freshman in a minute that Lincoln Riley just said could contribute to this football team, and could contribute to this football team may mean that he makes 4 catches the entire season, because he's talking about a wide receiver. But in this, it's Danton Lynn very clearly saying hey, if someone in the secondary goes down, or if for whatever reason someone in the secondary is struggling, whatever, we feel like this guy can step in and be a starting caliber college defensive back. So that's great. And Danton Lynn, obviously great defensive coordinator, knows what it takes to be that kind of player. So his praise is not unwarranted, or, shouldn't be taken lightly, I should say. And then the other two were both wide receivers. So they're Tanu Kynes and Corey Sims. Lincoln Riley, we got an ad here. Lincoln Riley has said that Tanu Kynes had an outstanding preseason performance, and then said about Corey Sims that he's done some really good things and looks to have the ability to help this team this year. And then special teams coach Ryan Dowdery earlier said about them that they're some of those new guys that he expects to play for them on special teams and be a core part of it, which is obviously important. It doesn't always get the most fan attention, but it is important. It's important that USC has a strong special teams this season. So yeah, it doesn't seem like they're going to be guys who are going to, overtake the starters or the stars by the end of the season, or even, necessarily break into the second team. But they're guys who could catch balls and, get some valuable playing experience before the season ends. And, especially in some of these early games that sort of function similarly to NFL preseason games, these are players that you want to watch because they matter a lot for the future. So, look for Corey Sims and Tanu Kynes to make a couple of catches against teams like Missouri State when USC's up big, hopefully. And look for them to contribute on special teams as well. So it's always good to hear that freshmen are contributing on the field in any sense. It's Alex Graham is obviously more significant and something that USC fans are probably a little bit more concerned about because it has to do with the first team defense. But, even seeing the wide receivers get in the game and contribute on special teams is good as well. So kind of all good notes on all of those three. And they're 3 guys to watch for sure when look out for their numbers when they hit the field, and just kind of pay close attention to them if you're someone who's concerned about USC's future, which I think all of our viewers here definitely are. So.
All right, much more coming up here on USC Primetime Live here at the Voice of College Football. But first, a word from our sponsor. We'll see you in about 45 to 50 seconds. Stay tuned.
You can make a difference here at the Voice of College Football. Use the Amazon link. Financially contribute to the Voice of College Football without spending a penny. Same shopping experience. You can make a difference here at the Voice of College Football. Use the Amazon link. College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line. You can make a difference here at the Voice of College Football. Use the Amazon link. Financially contribute to the Voice of College Football without spending a penny. Same shopping experience. It's easy. Go to any.
Okay, having problems loading that ad. So we'll continue on with the show. Hopefully we'll be able to play those ads a little bit later on from the Voice of College Football. All right, so Ethan, now we get into the big ticket items. The big story of the week at USC. It's not a happy one. DJ Wingfield. A lot to be said here. I'm not going to really give a preamble because I have a soapbox rant that I want to let loose with. But Ethan, your immediate reaction to DJ Wingfield being denied the ability to play for USC this fall?
I just think it's such a bad look for the NCAA. I mean, because there's so many players that are in a similar situation that are getting to play. I mean, the news comes out just a couple days later that, DJ Wingfield denied. There's also a UCLA receiver who's looking for an extra, in the same hearing was looking for a year of eligibility, denied. And then like 3 West Virginia players are allowed. And then also after that, the NCAA comes out and tries to say that, they shouldn't get it because it prevents younger, players from getting an opportunity and yada, yada, yada. Some, basically going on the whole amateurism thing again. And it's just a mess. It's a classic case of the NCAA not taking a hardline stance one way or the other and not, making it fair, because now it's what Lincoln Riley made a comment and he basically said, based on what state you're in and what judge you have, that entire one person's opinion kind of determines whether you get to play or not. And we've seen that play out with DJ Wingfield and that UCLA wide receiver, which we root real hard against the Bruins over here, but even kind of stepping out of that rivalry for a second, he's somebody you feel bad for too, because he's also watching his peers who are in the same situation not get to play. So yeah, it's just it's so situational and it's so based on judges' interpretations. And if they were leaving it up to the judges, but everyone was coming to the same conclusion, then you could argue that it's an okay system. But everyone, it seems like that's obviously not what's happening. You have these 2 players in California denied, then you have 3 players in West Virginia just a couple days later allowed. And Diego Pavia at Vanderbilt, no issues. He was kind of the big story of, and he's a big contributing player. DJ Wingfield's projected to be a starting offensive lineman, so also very important. But Diego Pavia is the difference between Vanderbilt being relevant or not. The difference in millions and millions of dollars of Vanderbilt football revenue. So imagine if Diego Pavia was denied. There's got to be some rule where it's standardized across states, because otherwise it's just not fair. There's no world in which you can call what's unfolded in the last week fair to every player involved. It's just not. It's based, it's one judge's opinion that's determining the entire course of their next season. I saw something also too that now DJ Wingfield can't now just go pivot and try to sign with an NFL team. He has to wait out a whole year of not playing football. He's had to kind of just wait around for a decision because, again, there's no standardized rule. And now the decision is no. And so he could have like tried to enter the draft or try to make the NFL. But instead he's been like waiting and hoping. And I don't know, it's just a mess and it's unfair. And I really feel for the players, you know, even outside of USC who are getting told no. So I think that the NCAA really does need to step in and for once just make it fair for everybody. But I don't think that they will. But I'm excited to hear your soapbox rant, Matt, because I'm sure it's informed by even more years of watching the NCAA's unfairness than mine. So excited to hear what you have to say.
The NCAA making things fair for everyone? What kind of nonsense is that, right? You know, the NCAA would never be fair to everyone. Like that just gonna elicit a lot of laughter in the room. All right, Ethan, you've laid down a very solid foundation. You reaffirmed Lincoln Riley's and basically every USC fan's essential point. Why is this not being interpreted the same by every judge in every state, in every jurisdiction? You know, so in West Virginia, players were allowed to play. The judge allowed West Virginia players to play. So like it's a lottery. It's just a crapshoot. Like, come on, that is just a transparent joke. So we've established that. Here are my two really big points. All right. First off, DJ Wingfield entered the transfer portal from Purdue. He was allowed to transfer from Purdue to USC. If you allow a player to transfer, but he's not cleared to play, why was he allowed to transfer in the first place? Like, hello, who's minding the store? Who's taking care of the fort, right? You can't allow someone to go into the transfer portal, which is tantamount to saying, yes, you can go and play for somebody else next season, and yet you're not eligible. That is crazy pants, right? Someone has to say, no. You don't get to transfer until we clear you. And then USC or any other program that's bidding for your services gets to then grab you in the portal because it knows you're going to be able to play. So that is the under-discussed part of this. You know, so we all know about the judges being inconsistent, the law being unclear, but why was he allowed to go into the portal? Why any player who went into the portal and is not being allowed to play, why were they in the portal in the first place? If they were never cleared to play, if it was never just obvious and set in stone, yes, you can play next season. So that is an absolute abomination, and it's really been a really under-discussed point of all this. Second part, apparently, you know, from the way some analysts have talked, and I'm no lawyer, so I'm not going to try and be, you know, well, I slept at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so I know the ins and outs of the law. I'm not going to be that guy, okay? But I've heard plenty of people say that the NCAA House settlement changed the landscape in this regard, okay? You know, in terms of the rulings on certain players from certain situations, like if there's a JUCO dimension to all of this, as there is for DJ Wingfield, that will affect eligibility and the rulings and interpretations. Gosh, you know, what were people spending time on in this settlement if they couldn't hash it out in a way that created very clear distinctions? So, I mean, you're making the point everything should have been standardized. Well, the people who were negotiating that settlement failed to reach the standardization. So, like, they dropped the ball. They were sloppy. They failed DJ Wingfield. They failed the UCLA receiver. They failed. And it just reinforces that there are no adults in the room to create that better, fairer playing field. It's just a failure on the part of so many different parties. You know, if you're reaching a resolution, my God, you should be making that resolution, that negotiated agreement, so clear, so transparent that it doesn't have to get to a judge. It doesn't have to get into this thicket of litigation. So the people who hashed this thing out, they failed, and they need to be held accountable. Not that they will, of course, but like they deserve an absolute, you know, thunderbolt of criticism for creating a settlement so unclear, so sloppy, developed in a pigsty, that it could not create the standardized realities that you were talking about. So, to reinforce what I was saying earlier about the transfer portal, USC was thinking, okay, there's this Purdue lineman we can get, and we're going to add him to our team. Like, that was just like, there's this pool of players that you can take from. There is the full expectation that you will be able to get that player. And so, like, just the added point, is USC going to be compensated for this? Like, like in a just world, there would be a way to say, hey, USC, you get a 30-day transfer portal opportunity, or you get $10 million, something. And I hope that somebody at USC Athletics can sue. This is not a, Darren Heitner was the lawyer for, or at least the representative for DJ Wingfield. Like, I'm not talking about suing on behalf of the individual. I'm talking USC seeking damages. I think that this seems to be fair game for USC to seek damages, because there was an expectation in a transactional commercial world that we can acquire this player because he was made available in the transfer portal. Like, someone at USC in the upper reaches of the athletic department or the university itself should be making that argument in a court of law to get damages from the NCAA. Like, I think that's very much in play for USC, or at least it should be. And I can say that without having slept at a Holiday Inn Express last night. All right, so those are my thoughts on the DJ Wingfield matter. Other news and notes as we move along here. Malachi Nelson, former USC player. We talked about Quentin Joyner, former USC Trojan. Malachi Nelson gets the starting job at UTEP. And, he went to Boise State and he was beaten out by Malachi Madsen. And I think a lot of us were surprised, because we thought that when Malachi Nelson went to Boise State, well, he's going someplace where he's going to be QB1, right? Like, you don't sit behind quarterbacks at USC to then go some other place to be QB2. You want to be QB1. You want to get your reps. You want to get your snaps. Well, UTEP seems like that kind of program, but it didn't work out at Boise State. So your overall thoughts on Malachi Nelson, presumably, or I should say officially being QB1 and finally being able to launch his career a couple years after he was sitting behind Caleb Williams at USC.
Yeah, so, first of all, great for Malachi Nelson. I think a lot of people are happy for him. I think, last year, I think a lot of people saw him not starting at Boise State as really an indictment of him. And of course, this is before Boise State went on to make the college football playoff. This was before people saw Boise State as a remote possibility to be a college football playoff contender. Like, people were looking at Boise State as a Mountain West school, a Mountain West school that had some fun upsets in the past, but, not one that was necessarily a perennial national championship contender. So they figured that you go from a program like USC, like you said, an established Power 5 school that has some of the most national championships in the country, to Boise, Idaho. You're going to start if you're truly the number one player in the class of 2023, like he was when he entered college. But now, revisionist history, Boise State was no joke. They went out and made the college football playoff, competed in the college football playoff, so. And Malachi Madsen is a very solid quarterback for sure. So it's not like, he got replaced by a bag of chips on a team that was a bag of chips. And I think another reason to kind of be happy for him here is he beat out, again, it's UTEP. So it's not like he's starting at an SEC school or anything. It's not like, he is Jackson Dart and immediately went and started at Ole Miss or anything. But he did beat out a guy at UTEP who was the incumbent starter. I did see. So, he had to beat a guy that the program knew that, they trusted to be their starting quarterback last season. And, he came in as the outside guy and beat him out, which is not easy to do, even if you're a really talented guy. And yeah, I saw something that like week 3, he's going to be matched up against Arch Manning in Texas, which, it's not necessarily like the NFL where we're going to see this great QB duel. I mean, the programs are in two very different states of existence. Texas is the number one team in the country as of now. And, preseason rankings are preseason rankings, but they're still, projected to be a great team. They were a great team last year, another college football playoff team, I might add. So, people aren't expecting this to be Brady versus Manning, but it is still an interesting little storyline because they were both top quarterbacks in their class. So it'll be interesting to see them finally duel it out, even if it's not necessarily on the most level of playing fields. But yeah, just all around, I think, happy to see him finally get his chance. I think he'll be one of the more intriguing names at a group at, non-Power 5 schools to watch this year, just because, at some point everybody thought he was this great talent. And I think when you have a year like you did last year because I'm sure that Malachi Nelson thought he was going to Boise State to start, right? I'm sure, Boise State probably embellished a little bit, as I'm sure a lot of these schools do when they can get a great talent like Malachi Nelson, and they're like, hey, we think you have a great shot to start here, blah, blah, blah. And, he's like, well, I'm, the number one quarterback in the class, and I'm, coming from USC, so it's kind of a given. But, sometimes something like that happens, and it's exactly what you need for your career, right? Like, you need to go to Boise State after being at USC and get humbled a little bit, and then, realize that you can't just kind of waltz your way into any D1 program and start. Like, you got to earn it. So I'm hopeful that it taught him to reinforce that he needed to work really hard, and that he's going to come out, with a chip on his shoulder and humble and motivated and be an interesting player to watch for sure. And like I said, I think most USC fans are rooting for him to do well.
All right, there's another big story we're going to talk about in college football. Let's see if we fixed our technical problems and can run this ad break. So 45 seconds, we'll be back at you.
You can make a difference here at the Voice of College Football. Use the Amazon link. Financially contribute to the Voice of College Football without spending a penny. Same shopping experience. It's easy. Go to any video on any channel. Go to the description section and grab the link right next to the capital letters that say Amazon. Use that link, and Amazon will instantaneously convert to your account, settings, history, everything intact, just like whatever link you use right now. No difference. Pay no attention to the product that you see right there. Just go search what you want. Don't forget the Amazon link. Thank you for your support. Sincerely, the Voice of College Football.
And you can catch our friend Mark Rogers at the Voice of College Football weeknights at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. And a new thing we want to point out here, we have our Voice of College Football website, vocfb.com, with daily stories, daily coverage of all things college football. Well, let's pop up the screen here. Just a moment. There we go. All right, so you can see on the screen the VOCFB shop. So Voice of College Football merchandise. So you see that snappy new VOCFB logo. So as you scroll around, you look around the page at vocfb.com shop. There are USC hats. There's going to be VOCFB Ohio State, VOCFB Michigan. Well, there are VOCFB USC hats and other forms of merchandise. So you want to support the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. Get yourself a nice new VOCFB USC hat or other piece of classy new merch, and we're going to try and build that out. But every USC hat you get at the VOCFB shop, that supports Ethan, it supports myself, it supports the USC channel, and we're going to ramp things up as we pull away from the VOCFB shop. But as we enter the regular season, we have some scheduling announcements we'll share with you right now, and you can tell your friends about it. And of course, like and subscribe to the channel at YouTube. Do that any time of year. But now that it's the season, Ethan and myself are committed to giving you the extensive USC football game coverage that you crave, that you want. So in the off season, we've been doing Thursday shows, but of course it's college football season now, so there's going to be games on Thursday night. Also the NFL games, of course, as well. So Thursday night, we're going to be competing with live football. We don't want to do that. So next week, we're going to move to Tuesdays. All right, write this down if you need to. We're moving to Tuesdays. It's still going to be 10 Eastern, 7 Pacific in Los Angeles, but we are moving to Tuesdays starting next week. And we will be coming at you Tuesdays throughout the season. But now our additional offering, you want a post-game show. My schedule is way too crowded on Saturdays. I have to be writing stories and editing stories at Trojans Wire and for my other college football media involvements. So Ethan and I have decided, and Ethan's been just a great teammate the whole way on this. Ethan and I have agreed to do a Sunday evening show as kind of our post game. It's just going to be day after. It's not going to be instant. It's going to be day after, 24 hours to process everything. We're going to be coming at you on Sundays at 8 Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. So the first installment of that will be Sunday, August 31st at 5 p.m. Pacific. I know the Notre Dame-Miami game will be going on then, but we want to be consistent about giving you a post-game show every week for your USC Trojans. So next week, our Tuesday show, our preview of Missouri State and the season, and then the week after, we go Sunday at 5 for the post-game, the day after post-game, and then Tuesday with our regular weekly show, which will be, a preview of the upcoming game. Also, we'll tackle some review topics, I'm sure, since it's a little earlier in the week. The other thing to mention about these shows, both the Sunday and the Tuesday, is that because it's in season, this is the time when Ethan and I need to make a little money, to support our work and justify our time and commitment. We don't do this in the off season, but now that it's game time, so to speak, it's go time. We're going to do that old fundraising model that I did with Tim Prangley, where we always give you a free hour, but if you want a second hour, we're asking for a certain amount of money in super chats, and if you want a third hour, we're asking for a certain additional amount of money in super chats. So if you just want 1 hour, you'll always get it. But if you want a second hour of Ethan and Matt, if you want a third hour of Ethan and Matt, then you'll need to put a few dollars in the tip jar to support our work. But we're offering the ability for you to have us for 3 hours if you're willing to make the investment to support us here at the Voice of College Football. All right, Ethan, so we're going to do some predictions for the USC season. But first, we have to tackle the other really seismic story that came out of college football today, and that is the SEC finally gets off its dime and moves to a 9-game conference schedule. Now, my thought about this was that, when Texas and Oklahoma went to the SEC, we were going to get 9 games. But it was interesting how long the SEC kind of dragged its feet, held off, waited to actually do this. The SEC seemed to be dragged kicking and screaming to this point. It's not as though it pushed it through right away because, well, let's be honest, it's worked really well for Nick Saban and Alabama and other SEC teams to have those 8 conference games. You get to schedule 2 cupcakes. You get 1 in September, and then you have Mercer week in late November before your rivalry game. So finally, the Big Ten establishes some parity with the SEC. Finally, both of the conferences are going to have 9 league games. There's plenty to unpack here, but what's your immediate reaction to the SEC finally going to 9 league games?
Well, I do think it's, like you said, it's good for the game. It's something equal across the conferences, and we talked earlier about DJ Wingfield not seeing any equality across states. So they're something that's very important in sports. For sports to exist and to be enjoyable for fans and players alike is fair rules that everyone tries to follow to their best extent. And sometimes you encounter situations like bad ball strike calls in baseball and the like that, make it unfair. But, as long as everyone's trying to make it fair, that's kind of what matters. And that's what makes sports enjoyable, is kind of the assumption that everyone's engaging in these things as fair as possible. So I think that that's really good. Great to see that. In that regard, I did roll my eyes a little bit at some of the comments from Greg Sankey, because he's like, oh, this illustrates the SEC's, longstanding commitment to playing competitive football as many weeks as we possibly can. And I was like, okay, like, yeah, more SEC superiority. It's like, wow, adding another conference game is immediately going to make our schedule, more difficult than everybody else's. And I'm sure that that's what you're going to get from a lot of SEC fans, is like, well, 9 SEC games is harder than 9 Big Ten games. And, meanwhile, they're playing like 3 and 11 Mississippi State or whatever. But that, that's another topic for another time, I guess. Yeah. And I'd point out, kind of like you said, like, why did it take so long? If this is, the SEC's mojo and their kind of MO is, playing the hardest games and not being afraid of competition. It's like, well, why did it take so long for it to be this even? But yeah, I mean, I'm still glad it happened. I think it goes to show that, the SEC is not completely tone deaf. They're not completely ignorant of their situation and ignorant of, how they look having only 8 conference games. And, basically, 90% of the time, those 4 games are like very low level FBS schools. And, it's not like they have 4 conference games, but they're playing 3 out of 4 against Power 5 schools. Like, it's not usually the case. I mean, it's usually, if you see an exciting Power 5 non-conference matchup, it's not usually an SEC school involved. And if it is, it's like a middle tier SEC school. And so, yeah, I just think this does give them a little bit better argument that they're setting up their schedule more fairly. And yeah, I just think it overall is more fair, because there's some standardization, and standardization is always good to see. So I think especially if it gives me a little bit of hope for them fairly establishing the future of the college football playoff, though I think we're going to continue to see them battling out. It gives me a little bit of hope that we can eventually come to a resolution that makes sense for both conferences, because I think that both conferences realize that they're the 2 biggest conferences in the sport, and it's in their best interest to kind of position themselves as such. So we'll see how that goes, but it's a good step in a lot of directions, I think.
Okay, a couple of follow-ups. Let me just hit you with a quickie, just a quick answer one. Are we here? Is the SEC going to 9 games if the SEC had 4 playoff teams last season instead of 3? The SEC fell short last season in a very conspicuous way. Are we doing this right now? Are we talking about this story if the SEC had been a lot better last season than it actually turned out to be?
Probably not, because I think a lot of SEC schools, for like the first time in forever, felt like they were kind of unfairly left out, versus teams like SMU and, those types of teams that
Indiana.
Yeah, Indiana.
That was the burr in the saddle.
Yeah, I think that kind of stung them a little bit, and so they were like, all right, like if we want, to be viewed on a level playing field, we gotta kind of buck up and do it.
Yeah, one small comment from me on this is, some national commentators are, they feel they're dunking on Curt Cignetti of Indiana, who's playing the cupcake schedule, as though, oh, Curt Cignetti has been exposed now. Like, now he can't, he's lost the high ground. No. Cignetti was doing it the way the SEC teams all did it. Like, and he was kind of holding up a mirror to the SEC saying, hey, you're playing Mercer in late November and you're playing another cupcake with your 8-game conference schedule. I'm going to do what you're doing. Like, so this is not, in my mind, a refutation of Cignetti. In fact, it makes him look good. That's a comment from me. And now that turns into a question for you, Ethan, and that is, I think the conventional wisdom now, in light of what the SEC is doing, going to 9 games, to me, like, this kind of is going to break the log jam in terms of the stalemate, whatever you want to call it, in terms of the college football playoff negotiations. To me, the SEC joining the Big Ten with 9 league games, it takes away a lot of the Big Ten's objections. And I think, the SEC now, we're taking the quote unquote risk of playing 9 league games. The SEC is now going to want, those extra playoff seats at the table, and that might enable the Big Ten to agree on the 5+11 playoff model. I think like this really does move the ball forward in terms of getting us to a 16-team playoff. Now, you can like it, folks, watching here at the Voice of College Football, or you can hate it. But just in terms of now analyzing the politics, I think this is getting us to 16. What's your take?
Yeah, I think so, because I think if you're the Big Ten, you don't necessarily need the assurance of having more established seats. Like you feel like some of these SEC schools with that extra tough SEC game are gonna, be affected the same way the Big Ten schools are. So you don't, feel the need for not a 9-3 Big Ten team and a 9-3 SEC team are effectively on level playing field now. You don't feel the need for your 8-4 Big Ten team to be viewed in the same vein as your 9-3 SEC team. So yeah, I think I could see a world where it makes sense that the SEC's model is more likely to happen now, and I don't think that that's a bad thing, because I think because I think that there are going to be some seasons where more guaranteed seats for each conference makes sense, but there's going to be some seasons where it's like we got like an 8-4 team making the playoff that lost in, 2 unranked games against clearly inferior opponents, and it's like, okay, what is one of the great things about college football is that every regular season game matters so much, and I think that they need to. I do like with the new playoff model that losing one game doesn't kill you, but I do think to some degree what makes it special is that every game matters so much. So preserving that a little bit is good. So kind of making everybody earn it in that regard. So yeah, I think you're right on that one. I think we could see, like I said, I think it's just a good kind of a good faith thing by the SEC that's going to see these two conferences be like, okay, well, if the SEC finally did what we've been doing for years, then we can look at their perspective a little bit with a little bit more good faith, probably.
All right, we're going to get to USC predictions from Ethan in just a moment, but one more follow-up on this story. The ACC is now the one outcast, or it's the one rebel, rogue, whatever you want to call it. So the Big 12, Big 10, SEC, those three of the Power Fours have 9-game schedules, but the ACC is still at 8. How important is it for the ACC to join the other 3 Power Fours and get to 9 conference games? Because obviously doesn't have the status, the cachet, the power of the SEC and the Big Ten, but it's still an imbalanced playing field and still part of that lack of standardization. That's been a theme of this show: standardization in the courts, standardization for DJ Wingfield, standardization of rules, procedures, processes, interpretations. So the ACC is standing against standardization. How important is it that the ACC joins the rest of the college football world?
I think that it's very important, unless you're the ACC and you want to get really creative and you take it to the next level and you're like, well, we're going to keep it at 8 conference games, but because I mean, let's face it, right? If the SEC is pretty likely to be is at risk of becoming the weakest of the 4 conferences if they don't, or at least being viewed as that, because I mean, just the trends in recent years, Clemson held up the ACC for a long time, and we kind of saw it with a 14-0 Florida State team not being put in the playoff, because people just don't consider the ACC the same level as the SEC. Even a 1-loss team in the SEC, and then we kind of saw it last year with SMU getting into the playoff, and then everybody kind of thinking well, they shouldn't have been there in the first place, and then Clemson didn't do too much to do that either. So I think the only thing, if you're not going to move to 8 games, then you move to or if you're not going to move to 9 games, then you keep it at 8 games and schedule 2 middle to upper tier Power 5 non-conference games. And then you're almost you're being defiant in like our schedule is actually even stronger than yours because we're, playing good teams in other conferences. I don't think that this is the college football landscape where the ACC is going to do that. I mean, it would be really interesting, and as a fan, I would love to see it. So I think because they're not going to do that, like moving to 9 games makes the most sense if they don't want to kind of fall off the map a little bit. But yeah, I mean, if I was in charge of the ACC and I still wanted to be rebellious, I'd be like, hey, let's just like schedule some non-conference games against, not like the Ohio States and the Georgias of the world, but maybe just like the Indianas of the world. And then, you win those games, suddenly you have a more interesting and varied resume. But I don't think that's going to happen. We don't. I think we're moving towards a lot of teams doing softer non-conference schedules. So, like I said, it would be super rebellious, but I don't think there's a world where that happens.
All right, closing out the show, and obviously, next week it's going to be our Missouri State preview. So might dig a little bit more into the matchups, the USC roster, what to expect from this game. I mean, we've talked about it in the off season to a degree, but we'll dive a little deeper into Missouri State next week. One other thing we're going to do next week, we'll look at the Big Ten schedule because USC is a Big Ten team. We will obviously be talking a little bit about Ohio State, Texas. That's the biggest Big Ten game on the board. So a lot of game stuff next week. But right now, 1 week out, Ethan, you have some predictions you'd like to toss out for this USC team. Not so much Missouri State, but for this USC team this season. What do you got for us with your bold predictions?
I just think that bold predictions are fun to throw out before every season. It's just like a way to, kind of air out your hopes for the season and just, get excited for what may be coming. I think the first one is I've kind of alluded to this on several shows before, but I think that my bold prediction is one of my bold predictions that I've been consistent on is I think out of the Michigan and Notre Dame and Oregon games, I think USC is going to win one of those, which is like the games that they're clearly not favorited in. I mean, now kind of Illinois has emerged as one of those, but throughout the offseason that we've been talking about, I think USC wins one of those. I think most likely it's Michigan at home. I think Oregon's probably in the middle, and I think the least likely is probably Notre Dame. But I just think USC kind of finally puts it together in the closing moments, has a game similar to the Penn State game, but hangs on to win. I do still think, though, that, and I've been consistent on this too, I think USC finishes with 3 losses. And I think it's because they lose one of the other games. And the 2 games that I'm looking at as being that possible third loss are the Illinois game or the Nebraska game. I think those are two really dangerous ones. So USC still goes like 9-3, which is kind of what a lot of people have been kind of expecting and, kind of saying is it's kind of been the standard prediction across what a lot of people think. But I think that they do have an upset on their resume. They just also lose a road game that, they're more traditionally thought of as supposed to win. Another one, I think that somebody on the USC team really separates themselves as a potential award winner or top 10 NFL draft pick or both. And I'm not sure, and I'm not ready to commit to any one player because I think that there's several players that it could be. I think that it could be Makai Lemon, Jacobe Lane, Kamari Ramsey, Eric Gentry, or even, Jaden Mayava. He's a little bit more of a dark horse. If you read some of the comments that, USC coaches have made about Jaden Mayava in recent weeks, you'd think he's going to be a Heisman contender, but I have to kind of wait and see before I throw a prediction that bold out there. But I do think that you're going to see the best prospect that you've seen in years come out of USC this year. And I think that that's what's so interesting about this year's USC roster is like, I'm pretty certain it's going to happen, but I just don't know who it's going to be because there's so many guys that it could be. So that's my bold prediction there. And one more that I'll throw out there for now is I think USC finishes with like a top 4 defense in the conference.
The older I get, and I've been I've been covering college football for almost 25 years. I started back in 2001 at College Football News. If you know the name Pete Fiutak or Rich Sermonello, like I started with those guys back in 2001, wrote at College Football News for 12 years, then moved to other outlets before joining Trojans Wire in 2020. The older I get, the more I don't like preseason predictions because, and you've heard me say this probably in past shows, whether it was this offseason or in previous years when I was with Tim Prangley or with Mark Rogers, just preseason predictions just seem to affect severely, far more than they should, how people perceive teams over the course of the season. If you're ranked ahead of 10 spots ahead of another team on Labor Day weekend, and we get into a 50-50 argument at the end of the season, and just the default reflexive stance is, well, they were ranked higher in the preseason, so like they maintained their ranking or they should be ranked higher. I really believe in just treating every college football season as a fresh, blank slate and just evaluating teams not based on 2024, not based on what's happened in recent years, not based on like the current reputation. Just evaluate teams for what they're doing and how good they are, how they evolve or how they regress. And like that win that seems really, really good in September, right? You get to late October, that team wasn't really all that good. So the quality of that win gets diminished. And that's why I believe that you should wait until November, basically after Election Day. Then college football pollsters should be voting, but not until then. That you need to digest 2 months of results, see which team's a mirage, which team's for real, which team's early season results actually did mean something, or which created the appearance of something big, but that team turned out to be awful. Like last year, Florida State was atrocious. So beating Florida State was not a high value win last season. Might have seemed like it in September, but by November, beating Florida State didn't amount to a hill of beans. So I just am more reticent to make bold predictions in general, but also USC, after the past 2 seasons we've seen, like I don't like thumping my chest for a team that, let's just see USC become great. And then we can say this team's legit, this team's for real. Like I don't want to hype this team up. And in fact, the reality that USC has not been ranked in either of the preseason polls, I love that because this team should have a chip on its shoulder. This team should view the coming season as no one believes in us. No one thinks we're going to be great. Go out, do it, earn it. We started the whole show with Lincoln Riley giving captains on a game-by-game basis. I love it. Earn it. It's not going to be given to you. You need to go out there and take whatever you are longing for, whatever you're looking for. It's not going to be handed to you. And USC had all these 50-50 games in the fourth quarter last season and was just so inconsistent at closing the sale. All right, guys, be the closer this time. Be Mason Miller. Be Mariano Rivera. Be the closer, okay? It's up to you. And so it's not up to how the bold predictions that I make. They don't mean, a warm bucket of spit. Just go out and do it, USC. Go out and do it, Trojans. Like that, I think, is the message. So I like emphasizing that point of emphasis instead of making big predictions. Now, in terms of, I will offer something, though. I'm not going to leave you all empty-handed. I'm going to say that most of USC's games against the Big Ten and Notre Dame, so we're tossing aside Missouri State and Georgia Southern. You could also say Purdue, because Purdue is a Big Ten team, but basically is a small conference opponent essentially. USC's big games, against the middle and upper tiers of the Big Ten and against Notre Dame, most of them are going to be under 50 total points. I think you're going to see a lot of slogs. I think you're going to see a lot of 20-17, 19-16 type games this season. It might not be pretty, and people might get upset with Jaden Mayava, but the reality is USC right now is a defense-first program. This is a defense-first team. Defense led the charge last season. I don't think that's going to change this year. And the fact that Jaden Mayava is such an unproven quarterback, like this team should play games through its defense. It should lean on its defense to win. Like the Illinois game, let's just look ahead briefly to that. Like that's a lot like the Michigan opener last season, where the defense was really the strength, and it was up to the offense to make use of field position, not turn it over. And so Miller Moss throwing the pick six against Michigan was such a crusher, right? Because you're giving a bad offensive team free points that did matter over the course of that game. But like in terms of that Illinois game, obviously we'll have a lot more to say as it comes closer. But I think the stylings of that game, and it's such a huge game for USC this season, are very similar to the Michigan game. Now, Luke Altmaier obviously can throw the ball. Michigan could not with Alex Orji last season. But I return to the basic point that USC is a defense-first team. The defense is what's going to be the anchor, certainly early in the season, while the offense tries to find its footing. So I think that's just going to lend itself to a lot of lower-scoring games. And it might not even necessarily be a problem on offense. If the offense can simply grind clock, keep the ball, get first downs, USC can win a 20-10 game by dominating. It's not going to look dominant on the scoreboard, but you just don't give the opposing offense any kind of field position, any kind of time of possession. USC could win games the way it did in the late 1970s. So I do think that most of USC's games against mid-tier or upper-tier Big Ten competition plus Notre Dame, they're going to be played in the teens, the high teens, the low 20s. I think you're going to see a lot of slogs and street fights as USC plays in the Big Ten Conference. I think that we're not really there in terms of Lincoln Riley getting back to hanging 35, 40 on good opponents, in his heyday at Oklahoma. Of course USC is going to hang big numbers on the bottom of the Big Ten, such as Purdue, such as Northwestern. But in terms of like the good teams, the decent, good, and really good teams on the schedule, I think you're going to see a lot of 23-20, 2017, 19-16 this season. So having said that, talking about point totals, we have one more advertisement to play here on our show at the Voice of College Football.
College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and then select a betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.
So yeah, I'm liking unders for USC's really competitive games. And of course, you want to follow Steve Merrill and Mark Rogers for college football betting analysis. I'm not going to say you should bet, but I am going to say that we have some really interesting, fun betting content for you this season. All right, so to recap, we're moving to Tuesday for next week. That's Tuesday, August 26th for our Week 1 Missouri State preview. And then after the Missouri State game and throughout the USC football season, and thank God it's here, we're coming at you Sunday at 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern for our post-game show, our day after post-game, and then regularly on Tuesdays throughout the season here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. And one more reminder, vocfb.com, our website, vocfb.com/shop to get USC merch, which supports our USC channel and supports the Voice of College Football as well. So for Ethan Inman, this is Matt Zemek. Next week is game week. Fight on.